welcome to the Temple Mount Podcast. My name is Shogun. Joining me again today is my good friend Giovanni. Very excited about this podcast. We did one of my favorite podcasts of all time with Mr. Giovanni about the state of UFO research and UFO contact experience and history. And unfortunately, there was some errors with the audio that didn't really do it justice. So today we're going to revisit some of this incredibly fascinating topic and probably go down a few additional roads and rabbit holes that we missed the first time. So I'm really looking forward to it. That being said, please make sure you've joined us on the Temple Mount Discord server. Make sure you subscribe to the official Temple Mount YouTube channel, where you can find hundreds of great podcasts on every subject you can imagine. And we've got episodes premiering every single day that are already recorded and uploaded. So you're not going to want to miss those. Subscribe now. That being said, welcome, Giovanni. Thank you for joining me again. How are you, sir?
I'm lovely. Thank you for having me again. Now, being that this is the second attempt at our ufology podcast, I'm looking forward to being able to actually put in a few pieces that I had missed the first time. Plus, I've assembled a few clips and some relevant videos that I think we'll be able to share and look at this time. But what I want to do is actually start out in a greater question, where if you examine the word ufology, most people have actually never heard of the idea of ufology. There's so many people these days whom routinely I've said over and over again, well, I study ufology, among many things that I study. And people say, what's that? Well, if you break down the idea of UFO and then ology, obviously we know ology being the study of something, and then UFO, of course, that seems very simple. It's an unidentified flying object, but there's also USOs, unidentified submerged objects, so on and so forth. There's all kinds of different ways of examining the subject matter, but ultimately this study as a whole boils down to a very simple idea, which is the idea that we're studying not simply beings themselves, but the physical evidence, the documentation, and everything possible that could be possibly encompassed in this whole greater idea of studying the fact that human beings are truly not alone in the universe. Absolutely not. And this is a question that ultimately deserves one piece of justice, truth be told. In the world of ufology, it's not a uniformed field. It's not a monolith. There are many, many, many different groups of people within ufology as a whole that have wildly differentiating views. And you have some out there whom are hypercritical to the point of almost being skeptics themselves. And at the same time, you have some people who are just so out there in the world of ufology that they're beyond being able to be taken seriously. I would say that I would fall somewhere in the middle, simply because I've seen a great deal of information that has been shown to have some incredible evidence, and evidence is really the smoking gun that gives life to the entirety of ufology. But if we go back into ufology and ask, well, where does it all begin? There's a great many whom would say, depending on what source you choose to approach, there are those who would argue that we ourselves as human beings are in fact the result of the tampering with life by beings from other worlds. Now, we could go into biblical books, holy books of all different faiths around the world, but those are more esoteric ends of study when it comes to the world of ufology. Others would attempt to say, well, let's look at something a little bit more modern. If we take a more modern context on ufology, we have some more evidence and some physical explanations that give a lot of credence to certain hallmarks. For example, everyone is familiar with the Roswell crash. Now, in recent days, there has been a great deal of skepticism and half-hearted arguments that have been used in an attempt to discredit the authenticity of the Roswell crash and attempt to make it out into something minor or something benign or mundane. Well, those arguments don't hold. We have, as a traditional story, as I would assume that most people are familiar with the Roswell story, but for those whom are not, the idea is that in sometime in 1947, we have a crash of not one, but two different alien craft in the deserts, in Roswell, and in one other location. But the idea here is that not only did an alien spacecraft from another world, a true extraterrestrial piece of technology that had living beings aboard it, crash in the desert in the United States of America, we also have survivors. And that alone is worth exploring. And we will go into that in just a moment, but I'd first like to dispel some of the skeptics who argue, well, it didn't really happen. Well, there are several problems with that claim. First and foremost, we have many, many, many eyewitnesses whom themselves not only saw the bodies, we also have the reporters, and we have the actual newspaper reports that were issued and the radio addresses from that day that actively said that a flying disc has been captured and is now in possession of the Army. This made big radio news, and it made big newspaper news mere hours before suddenly the story was changed. This slipped through the cracks. They have paid personnel over $1,000 an hour to go out into these crash sites and pick up every single piece of equipment or every single shred of alien spacecraft with tweezers. $1,000 an hour, that's nothing to scoff at. There have always been secret weapons and secret black works projects that have been active in this country, especially the United States and other countries like Russia, that have been active for decades, decades and decades and decades. And America was not the only one to have a Roswell incident. Even the Soviet Union allegedly had its own UFO crash. But Russia is a little bit more mysterious in its own case. Regardless, if we go back into the early chapter of ufology as a study in its inception, not even studying what it's looking at, but just the study itself, what you will find is a series of interesting incidents. We have in the early 60s, in America, the first couple, or rather, really the first party of individuals in American history to ever openly espouse that they themselves were actually abducted by alien beings. This is Betty and Barney Hill. Now, the thing about Betty and Barney Hill is very specific and very special because Betty and Barney Hill are an interracial couple in America in the early 60s. She herself was a European and he was African. He was also a veteran of the Second World War. He fought in Europe. They had expressed a story where they claimed that they had gone to Canada on vacation, and upon returning to the United States of America, they were abducted by beings from another world. The story was for them that they experienced a series of events that have, in recent days, or what followed after them, became very standard as far as what abductees experienced. Now, if you look at their story, what we have is Betty and Barney talking about experiencing what we would think of as so-called lost time, where they're looking at something and then suddenly, in the blink of an eye, 45 minutes to an hour to 2 hours have simply vanished. And they couldn't explain this. So here we begin with something interesting. We have physical evidence. There were puncture marks on both of them. There were pieces of evidence on their physical bodies that something had occurred with them, but they could not account for this lost time. So they had endeavored to speak to an actual regressive hypnosis specialist. Regressive hypnosis is actually something quite standard in the world of ufology because of so many people losing their memory of an abduction after it occurs. But it doesn't always happen universally. It's not universal. And believe it or not, one of the most famous cases of a UFO abduction featured no memory loss at all. This was, of course, Travis Walton. We will address Travis Walton and his case later. But I do wish to state that he never lost his memory. So it doesn't have to be a universal occurrence, and it isn't. There are also people who experience not abductions, but experiencers. People who are asked by alien beings, "Would you like to come with me?" And they say, yes. There are contactees as well as abductees. Contactees almost universally experience something positive, not something negative. But back to Betty and Barney Hill. During their regressive hypnosis, they describe a very interesting experience where the two of them were separated into different rooms and given a medical examination. Barney had his dentures taken out, which Betty, in a separate incident, described the beings whom she was describing, talked about them tugging on her teeth for reasons she did not understand. This seemed to convey the idea that because Barney's teeth were fake, they immediately believed her teeth were fake. Of course, that's just my personal speculation. But in any case, Betty at one point during the interview, or during her hypnosis, I should say, asked the beings, as she was reliving the memory, and she asked, "Where are you from?" She claims that they showed her a star map, and she, in a trance, recreated this star map. This star map, which still exists in its original sketch to this day, is an exact replica of the Zeta Reticuli star system. The Zeta Reticuli star system is a binary star system, meaning it has two suns, and is located approximately 30 light years from Earth. It can only be seen from the southern hemisphere. This is the same exact place. If we fast forward to the late 1980s and early 90s with Bob Lazar, whom we will also address later in this podcast. Bob Lazar, who is not an abductee, rather a government engineer, whom had the personal privilege of being able to work on an actual alien spacecraft, stated unequivocally that the craft and the other craft that he had, which he only had worked on a single craft, but he claimed through documentation that he was allowed to read, unequivocally, the technology that the United States government had locked away and that he was operating on was brought by alien beings from the Zeta Reticuli star system. I do not find this to be coincidental. It makes absolutely perfect sense why Bob Lazar would also claim the Zeta Reticuli star system, the same as the Hills, whom he had no connection with. Now, aside from Betty's recreation of the star map, it should also be critically noted that Betty described a particular medical procedure. She claimed that they stuck a needle through her navel in order to extract eggs. At the time, in the 60s, when she herself told this to the doctors laughed at her. The doctors laughed at her and said, that can't be done. That's just ridiculous. You can't extract eggs by going in with a needle through the navel. Well, today, that's standard practice in many fertility clinics. Multiple parties, probably more than I can count, from across the latter half of the 20th century, all report very similar instances during any abduction, not contact, or not experiencer, generally not experiencers, but never through contactees, but always through abductees. universally describe gray aliens or someone or something working with gray aliens attempting to take their reproductive cellular structures, sperm and ova, human sperm and egg, over and over again. Now, this sounds ridiculous, but we have to examine the situation and the circumstances of the time. Betty and Barney Hill were only the first Americans to ever the first Americans at the time to publicly report their abduction. There was one prior gentleman in Brazil who was a farmer. He was the first in world history to publicly announce such a thing himself, but he didn't necessarily make the media in the same way that Betty and Barney Hill did. But it's also important to note that because of their interracial marriage, this is a couple whom has every reason in their best interest to not be in the public eye. For those who say, well, these two are clearly just hoaxsters, they want to make it up, they want attention. We're talking about the early 60s here with an interracial couple. These are people who are running the risk of their reputations and the risk of their respect. They're already running a risk by virtue of their relationship alone at this point in time, an age where people are more than prepared to ridicule them over their relationship alone, let alone going public about something like this. So it makes no sense to me that anyone would want to simply make this up, especially for those in their positions. Now, it's in the 50s and 60s that you have a whole series of different, not just abductees, but contactees begin to emerge. And many of them have great pieces of physical evidence, but there were a couple of hoaxsters. In my personal opinion, the Swiss German Billy Meyer is a ridiculous hoaxer, as is Stan Romanek. Both of these men are shysters and hoaxsters who have fabricated evidence for their own sake of attention. But these hoaxsters do not take away from serious incidents that have a whole host of not only physical evidence, but from professional eyewitnesses, including military pilots, military personnel, and others who amount to what we would call professional witnesses or credible witnesses, and not simply some toothless ho-hum who lives in the middle of the woods. But you do have, throughout the 50s and the 60s, an explosion, a literal explosion of UFO sightings that skyrocket over 1,000%. The amount of UFOs seen around the world had exploded over 1,000% during this period of time. During the Second World War, UFOs had been seen in a reasonable number by all sides of the conflict. All of the different warring sides of the Second World War believed that the craft in the sky they were seeing were secret weapons by the other side. When the Germans viewed them, they believed that they were Allied weapons. When the Allies viewed them, they thought they were Axis weapons, and so on and so forth. So it's become quite clear that this has been going on for a very long time. And of course, many might be tempted to say, well, look at this ancient painting of a UFO here or there or everywhere. And if you want, you could even go as far back as two interesting incidents that were recorded in the 15 to 1600s over Switzerland and Austria, or what we would think of as Switzerland and Austria today, where townsfolk in two different towns claimed to have watched a battle in the sky, not once, but twice. An actual battle in the sky between different groups of flying craft that appeared to be shooting light at one another. There was a painting made of the incident with great detail, and allegedly some craft even crashed. I don't know much more about the incident there. However, if we take someone like Billy Meyer, an obvious faker, and cast him aside for a moment, we then have to examine the differences between the contactees and the abductees. The abductees universally are talking about being taken against their will, being given medical examinations, and being subjected to experiments, normally health and reproductive related experiments, almost universally by small gray men or little gray beings with large black eyes. If we then move on to, for the moment, the contactees, it's a very different formula. In this case, the contactees do not express a sense of fear or abduction. They almost universally describe meeting not little grays, almost, sometimes they do, but beings that we would normally in the world of esoteric sciences call Pleiadians. Pleiadians are alleged to be tall, quite tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and gorgeous, universally beautiful and recognized as incredibly angelic human beings that look as if they are Norwegians or Swedes or Danes, Northern Europeans, hence why some people call them Nordics or Nordic aliens. They allegedly come from the Pleiadian star system, which is located approximately 500 light years from Earth, but is visible from the Northern Hemisphere. The story behind these contact, rather than abduction, contactees almost always describe being overwhelmed with a sense of beauty and love and compassion that's so energetic and alive, so much so that grown adults whom moments ago and who might have never believed in aliens have suddenly watched a ship come from nowhere, fly down in front of them, and tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed men and women dressed in skin-tight blue suits from the neck down step out of the ship and ask them, "Would you like to come with us?" And these people, when they retell their stories, and it's universal, the same story is universally retold from America to Mexico to Brazil to England to Poland to Italy to Japan to Russia, everywhere, Australia, you name it, all over the world. Every single contactee tells the same story. I refuse personally to believe that all of these people are making this up. It simply makes no sense to make all of this up. They gain nothing from it. And what they describe is a situation where they are overcome with such a sense of love that they feel as if they have known this individual or individuals their whole lives, their entire lives. And it simply makes no logical sense, but they feel so immersed by it. And it's something that I would argue is worthy of exploration because it is beautiful. So it's obvious to me, and I will specify this as nothing more than my own personal feelings. It's important to draw the line when I'm speaking only from my own opinion. But it's in my personal opinion that these beings have obviously tapped into the truth of real spirituality, and that they have likely built what we would think of as utopia in their worlds, and it would be a joy for us as human beings to learn from them. But apart from the contactees, you have this consistency on a different note. You have a deep consistency with all of these people who are describing the abductions by Greys and other beings which have been described as the form most commonly reported beings in ufology. There are about 70 that have been documented and reported, but the four most common are Greys, Pleiadians, mantis beings that are described as very large insectoid creatures, and of course, reptilians. Ah, yes, similar to that. But the difference is here, I wish to draw a line of distinction very strongly before we move on to a few clips that I have prepared. I wish to draw a very stern and very strong distinction. There are those, such as David Icke, who would continue to promote the idea that so-called reptilian aliens are involved in some kind of grandiose conspiracy. The most I'm willing to say is this. From nothing more than ufology reports alone, I am inclined to believe that there certainly may well be a reptilian race of alien beings among certain UFO abductions and human contact, but I have never been presented with a shred of evidence, once, not even once, to suggest that these beings are somehow or another involved in the affairs of our world for secretive and nefarious reasons. There simply has never been any evidence to me, and I unequivocally and categorically express that I am not on board with that idea. With that being said, if we move on into the 70s, actually, I'd like to backtrack for just one moment. If we examine the case of all of these people who have experienced abductions and all universally talk about having medical and reproductive experimentation performed on them, I would beg the question on a humanistic level. These people are telling a very embarrassing and compromising story that amounts to a very tragic and very traumatic experience that's deeply traumatizing to them. I am not inclined to believe that these people are making this up. No one wants that sort of attention. No one wants to be laughed at and mocked and ridiculed for sharing a traumatic experience, especially one that involves being experimented on for sexual reasons. Now, as to why such beings have such a goal, why such greys would attempt or have a desire to perform these medical and sexual experiments on human beings, I honestly cannot say. There are those who would point to the idea that it was the Truman and then Eisenhower administration that made the first agreements or alleged treaties, quote unquote, with beings from another world. I do not know enough about those alleged documents in order to say with any degree of certainty that they are in fact true. But it is very much believed within certain realms of ufology that the United States government did make some kind of agreement with beings from other worlds to allow them to abduct and experiment on human beings in exchange for them giving our government limited releases of their technology. We wanted all kinds of technology from them. Now, this is strongly asserted by Philip Corso, I should say, whose rank escapes me at the moment, so I don't want to misquote by calling him a colonel if he's a lieutenant colonel. But regardless, it's Philip Corso, whom had wrote the book, if I remember correctly, after Roswell, which I will go back and make sure that that is in fact the correct book. But it is Philip Corso whom specifically pointed out and asserted that surreptitiously the advancement of the human civilization in its massive jump in technology had accelerated as a result of the military surreptitiously releasing limited amounts of alien technology to the public only after the military had succeeded in asserting itself at being approximately approximately at least 30 years ahead of the rest of the civilian sector. With this being said, most people today think of Area 51 as the place where alien technology is kept, but that's not actually the case. Most of the equipment at Area 51 are just conventional spy planes. Before its declassification, it was the home of the SR-71 Blackbird, and of course the B-2 bomber. And for the record, it should be noted that the B-2 bomber actually has some limited forms of anti-gravitational propulsion built into the craft, but nothing to the degree of a full-fledged UFO. No. Those craft, the real alien craft, are locked up in different facilities, specifically one that I can point to exactly being S4, where Bob Lazar worked. But before we move on to Bob Lazar, I would actually like to take a moment to address the time of Travis Walton. Now, Travis Walton, unfortunately, I don't have the correct documentary in front of me to play the clip from, but I would like to speak about Travis Walton for just a moment, as well as a UFO abduction known as the Allagash incident. In fact, let's take the Allagash incident first. You have in the 70s a group of men, 4 men, who go out to a lake in New England, and you have among them a situation where they have started a massive bonfire on the beach so that in the night they know where to go back to the shoreline. They enter their canoes, not one but two different canoes, and they all go out into the lake. It's at this point that all of the men claimed that a large light, a huge light, flew directly over their canoes, and then they experienced missing time and found themselves immediately back on shore with the fire, the raging fire that they had just lit, totally burnt out and was nothing more than embers, and they themselves were already back ashore holding their canoe oars, and hours had passed. And they were never able to quite understand how or why this happened. Some of them went for regressive hypnosis. But it's during this time that this incident, I would say, the Allagash incident in particular, represents the greatest, perhaps probably the most pathetic attempt in the history of ufology for skeptics to attempt to shoehorn an incident that completely falls outside of their tiny little world that they can't explain, and they're attempting to shoehorn it into this little shoebox and say, well, there's your explanation. Well, that just doesn't work. Specifically, one of the skeptics claim that if you look at these men's regressive hypnosis, all of their regressive hypnosis stories all come down to the same story, that they were taken aboard a spacecraft by tiny gray beings who stripped them, laid them on a table, and were performing some kind of reproductive or medical experiment. And this is the same thing that happened to Whitley Strieber, the gentleman of whom his personal story was the genesis for the creation of the probing joke. As most people today might have heard of the probing joke of aliens sticking a device up one's anal cavity. That incident, we tend to laugh at such a concept today, but for Whitley Strieber, that was very traumatic. And before I move on to that one, the Allagash incident with these 4 men, what you have is a case where the skeptics will, in their desperation to say, well, there's more logical explanations than aliens abducting people. Okay, well, what's your explanation, Mr. Skeptic? Oh, well, you see, if we take this room, this very quiet and controlled room, and we put this very specific helmet on somebody, a volunteer in a chair, and we pump very specific and very highly controlled computer impulses into their brains, it'll recreate the same feelings that these men had. You expect me to believe that all of that happened to the exact level of specificity while these men were out in canoes in the middle of New England in the night? That the same conditions in your laboratory just happened to be recreated on that canoe? It's preposterous. It's another case of skeptics who won't accept that there is something they don't understand, and so they attempt to cram and to ramrod and to shoehorn their explanations or the world that they don't understand into this little box that they live in, and it just doesn't work. Now, if we move on to Whitley Strieber before we address Travis Walton and his abduction, Whitley Strieber, the writer of the book Communion, describes a dual purpose for why these aliens had been very rough with him. He claimed that the device that they had inserted into him was not only meant to take fecal samples, which would make sense. We do that with human beings and animals alike on this planet. But in addition to the fact that he claimed that it was also used to extract sperm, which again makes total sense. And for the record, I will state very, very sternly that I cannot speak to any degree of knowledge as to why these beings seek to study our reproductive systems and our genetics so strongly. I honestly cannot say. And unfortunately, there are those out there who will attempt to say, and even abductees themselves, who don't know anything. They might have met them, they might have seen them, they might have experienced them. But even for those who do or don't alike, there are too many people out there who will attempt to say, oh, well, I know why the Greys are doing this. They're jealous of us. They lost their emotions somehow. Well, do you know that? How do you know this? Are you speculating? They lost their emotions. They're jealous of us. They're trying to regain their emotions by experimenting on us. You don't know that. You don't know that at all. And this, unfortunately, is what happens in the world of not only ufology, but many pieces of science, where others, be they, quote, professionals or not, will mix conjecture, speculation, and supposition all together at once, roll them up in a ball, and present it as some kind of factualized theory or reality, when it's all just a bunch of their personal feelings. Well, that doesn't bring us anywhere. Even as recent as the late 50s, you had scientists out there who had made a ridiculous prediction that, in a sense, almost gave birth to the transhumanist movement of today, which was entirely based on conjecture, supposition, and speculation, presented as fact. And that theory was, as they believed, that the only way that these UFOs and their alien occupants could have ever made it to our planet, they believed, well, nothing can, quote, travel faster than the speed of light, which is not true. Or they couldn't imagine anything like that. So they said, well, therefore, in order for someone or something to survive the enormous G-force of traveling from point A to point B to our solar system for all those many, 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 many years, because, and I say many years because even at the so-called speed of light, even though light doesn't have a, quote, speed, it would still take 3 to 4 years for light from our planet to reach our nearest star of Alpha Centauri, the Sol system, that's our solar system's nearest neighbor. 3 to 4 years. So obviously what we would think of as, quote, the so-called speed of, even though that's a wrong word, it's a rate of induction, not a speed. And there's a difference. The so-called speed of light is too slow. So because our scientists could not believe or think that civilizations from other worlds had circumvented or been able to overcome this problem, they immediately came to the conclusion, well, the only beings that the occupants in the ships could possibly be have to therefore be robots and machines. Well, why is that? Well, because if they sat there and took the enormous G-force, like we're all on a roller coaster that's moving at such an inconceivable speed that our mouths are held open by the force of the motion, well, that just doesn't happen. Well, that the only beings who could survive doing that at the speed of light, they have to be machines. Therefore, they said, the end result of civilization and human evolution must be for all of us to become machines. Well, that's just ridiculous. That whole theory is based on once again conjecture, supposition, and speculation. That's just flat out wrong. So with this in mind, we then go to Travis Walton. Travis Walton is one of the more famous UFO abductees, not simply because he never lost his memory and did not need regressive hypnosis. He remembered everything that happened the moment he was back on Earth. He also had a movie made out of his incident, which became, for at least a time, a nationwide story. UFO abductions don't normally do this, but in his case it was very different. Travis Walton was not a forester, but a lumberman, whom was working out in the woods one day, I believe in Arizona, don't quote me on that one, but somewhere in the western end of the United States, in the forest with some of the other lumber workers. In the late end of the night, they saw a UFO come down from the sky, and the men became frightened. They began to back away, but Travis Walton himself approached the light. According to the witnesses, the light, being the ship, fired some kind of light out of it, which struck Walton and sent him flying a few feet back. The men, after becoming scared, jumped in their truck and drove away, only to, a few minutes later, realize, we left him. We need to go back. They turned around, went back to the scene, and both he and the ship were gone. The movie Fire in the Sky, made in, I suppose one might say, roughly the so-called honor of the incident or of Mr. Walton, roughly details these incidents, but it does a better job of explaining the story of what occurred on the ground, but its portrayal of what happened to Mr. Walton on the ship is absolutely inaccurate and does not reflect Travis Walton's descriptions of what happened to him at all. With that being said, according to Travis Walton, actually, before we move on to what Travis Walton himself said, let's address the men who observed him and watched the UFO not only fire something at him, but also seemed to take him away. The first thing that struck these men was the idea that if we go back and we report this, you know what's going to happen to us. They're going to accuse us of murder, and they're going to think that we're trying to cover up a murder, and that we killed him, and we buried him, and we're trying to make up a whole new incident in order to cover up for what we allegedly did. They knew this, but they reported it anyway. Now, the sheriffs did not tell these men that they were being recorded when they were left alone in a separate room. To the sheriff's surprise, as they expected these men to be talking amongst themselves, talking about burying a body, or how do we cover this up? Do you think they're going to believe us? No, they were completely convinced. The sheriffs listening to, and that's not to say the sheriffs believed the men, but they just didn't expect these men to continue to be saying the same thing, which was, how is anyone going to believe us? We saw that craft take Travis away. They're going to think that we killed him. So it became a phenomenon and a nationwide, for a time, controversy, because at least for the first few days, all of the local area believed that these men had murdered him. Meanwhile, Travis Walton himself tells a very different story than what the movie would have you believe. And it's at this point that even a federal marshal has been called in to try and solve the incident. They brought in dogs, they brought in all kinds of resources to try and find out where this man was. Now, I'd like to take a moment to address the film. In the film would have you believe that Travis was undergoing a very traumatic table incident akin to a gray abduction, being held to a table and having some sort of drill pressed into his eye. Well, that's not what happened. So, unfortunately, I must stress again that the film does no justice to what Travis actually claimed to have seen. Addressing his true story, Travis claimed that he woke up fully clothed on an alien spacecraft, that he rolled off the table and saw a group of grays in the corner, and that he himself looked around the room, grabbed a device that we would think of as a beaker or some sort of experimental glass device, and he attempted to break the device in order to create a weapon in the way that many human beings would break a bottle to create a weapon. But according to Travis, the glass simply would not break, no matter how hard he attempted to bang it. It's at this point that the Greys shuffled out of the room, realizing that Travis himself was panicking. Travis then proceeded to wander around the ship for some time until he eventually found a room that in the center of it housed a chair and some sort of bizarre control panel that he had no clear understanding of how to operate. But he said that he sat in the chair and he began to randomly push buttons. And on the actual displays in front of him and around him, he claims that he was bombarded with images of all kinds of different star systems all around him. And it's at this point that he claimed a tall man dressed in a blue suit, that a blonde, light-eyed man dressed in a blue suit, a skin-tight blue suit, approached him from the entrance to the room. Travis, claiming at first thinking he was being rescued, attempted to communicate with this man, but he claims that the man would not speak to him audibly, but would only smile. The man beckoned Travis to follow him out of the room. Travis followed, and the man led him out of the craft. According to Travis, after he stepped out of the craft, he looked around to reveal that the craft he was in was simply one of a great multitude of many, many craft in a massive hangar or some kind of large housing, some kind of large housing hangar of some kind, or a dock, be it a ship or even a simple space station, who knows, in the middle of space. And he claimed to have been able to look out and see space in and of itself, and that the whole hangar was just filled with ships, just like the one he had stepped out of. It's at this point that he claims a human female, or a seemingly human female, placed some sort of oxygen mask over his face. He began to breathe and fell asleep. The next thing he remembered He was on his back on Earth, looking up at the stars and seeing the craft that had just dropped him off take off into the heavens, and that he had 3 days worth of beard growth. He stood up, back on Earth, and remembered everything that had just transpired, everything, and immediately tried to run to find the nearest payphone, which he did. So, of course, everybody was relieved to see that Mr. Walton was still alive, especially his coworkers, because they were all afraid that they were about to go to jail for murder. He retold the story of what happened, but of course, such a thing was difficult to substantiate. And of course, it came, even in the 70s, with its own series of stigmas and risks to his own reputation. With that being said, if we move on to something a bit more modern, we now have something that's a little bit different, and I'd like to play this clip. This clip is from the late Dr. Roger Leir. Dr. Roger Leir was known as the UFO surgeon. This was a gentleman whom was the go-to doctor for all sorts of people whom claimed to have been abducted by alien beings, but not simply abducted, but also had mysterious and anomalous objects placed inside their bodies. These objects, which are traditionally obviously simply known as alien implants, are very special for several reasons, and I would like to defer to this clip right now. Let's take a look, shall we?
Absolutely.
So with that being said, we now have... There we go. With that being said, we're looking at a situation where the physical evidence has given us the smoking gun that the supreme skeptics have been wanting, and they still don't accept it. You have skeptics out there whom, in spite of what you've just seen, will attempt to say, oh, well, it was probably just a nail. It probably just bumped into you and it went inside you when you were working in your shed. I don't own a shed. Oh, you were probably in your shed that you don't own, and you were working in your workshop and you just bumped into something and it went inside you and you didn't know it. That's your argument? I say to the skeptics, that is your argument? A metallurgy test that has clearly shown us that this is manufactured meteorite metal that exclusively appears in space, and you're telling me that it just happens to be some ordinary object that came from an ordinary place? I say to the skeptics, show me a single hardware store in this world that sells anything made with extraterrestrial metals from meteorites. One that, as of course the documentary just stated, are so rare that only a handful have ever been found. And you mean to tell me this is not evidence? That's called denial. This is supreme denial. And yes, many people out there have never known that alien implants exist. They absolutely do. And they are a supremely ignored smoking gun that shows us without a shadow of a doubt that human beings have not only been abducted, but we have had physical objects put inside our bodies. Now, this next clip, which I will go through, the whole piece, we're not going to play the whole documentary, of course, but much of what I'm going to play right now is actually from a little documentary that one might think of about Majestic 12. Now, Majestic 12 is an alleged council that was set up by the Truman and then Eisenhower administrations during the early 50s in regards to the United States government assembling a covert cabal or a covert group of academicians, military personnel, and scientific personnel in order to create a policy, or what we would think of as a covert policy, for the United States government's intentions or interactions with alien beings. With that being said, I'd like to play this clip right here. Take a look. This is about what are called the Majestic documents. The story is that in the 50s, the Majestic documents, or at least a copy of the Majestic documents, were leaked to the public by an unnamed agent known as Deep Throat. Let's take a look at this.
At least at the good ones like Aztecs, you'll find these guys.
That's Richard Dolan.
Ufologists.
We have unofficial truths.
And it should be noted that Richard Dolan, I have to interrupt the clip for just a moment to say, it should be noted that Richard Dolan actually interviewed a gentleman whom I would like to play a clip of, because he himself claims to have met, or at least seen, one of the original Roswell aliens themselves. But we'll continue this clip for now.
In 2003, some of the best in the business were featured at the Aztec Symposium. These are serious guys. Historians, scientists, authors, internet whiz kids. All of them dedicated to discovering the truth behind the UFO phenomenon. If this were a trial, they would be the expert witnesses. With every controversy, you need a yin and a yang. With Majestic 12, the yin is Carl Flock. He doesn't deny that some UFOs are probably alien spacecraft. He just doesn't believe there is any evidence that they were recovered by the government. Needless to say, he doesn't buy the Majestic 12 story.
And there's a fly down there.
The yang is Stan Friedman, a nuclear physicist. Stan has been on the UFO beat for over 3 decades. He is the original civilian investigator of the Roswell incident and the biggest advocate of the authenticity of the original Majestic 12 documents.
I don't know how to do that.
Finally, there's these guys, the alleged members of Majestic 12. There's no question that they were an all-star group. Top military leaders, scientists, and civil servants. They were among the best and the brightest that America had to offer in 1947. But were they members of this top-secret organization known as Majestic 12?
It should be noted here that although I consider Stanton Friedman a phenomenal researcher, and I do agree with him extraordinarily so when it comes to his defense of the actual Majestic documents as authentic, and he does make an extraordinarily strong argument, I should say, for their authenticity, I disagree with him when it comes to Bob Lazar. Friedman conducted what I would argue was a sloppy and half-hearted investigation when it came to researching the authenticity of Bob Lazar and his own stories. So apart from my disagreement on Lazar, I do agree with Friedman when it comes to these documents.
Were they at the center of a government cover-up of extraterrestrial life? The skeptics say no, because, well, that's what Carl Flock is here for, so I'll let him handle the yin from here on in.
The first big problem with them is that there's no provenance. We don't know where they came from. We don't know, none of the original documents are in hand, so there's no way you can test the paper, you cannot, you can't really look at the inks, there's none of the stuff that you would normally do with a questioned document. You can't do it.
In the United States, at least at the time we got the memo, it was not against the law to have classified material that you were not entitled to. It was against the law if you were entitled to see classified material, if you had an appropriate clearance and need to know, to photograph it, certainly against the law to distribute it to somebody without a clearance. So the guy at risk is the guy who took the pictures, not the guy who receives them.
Secrecy protocols within the military in particular are extreme. Penalties are extreme. You sign away your constitutional rights in many cases when you are exposed to very, very sensitive classified information. And in many cases, this is binding for life. So it's not that easy to go talking about what you've experienced.
We still don't know who Deep Throat was. Does that mean that whatever information he provided is worthless because we don't know who he was? He's the guy who was at risk, remember. And that's what we have to consider here, too. Providence would be nice. You make do, you look at the documents for what they are and what they say, not with any preconceived notion, well, I don't know who put this out there, so it must be phony. That's nonsense. That's not reasoning.
If you feel your life or liberty is in danger by releasing these documents, of course you're going to want to remain anonymous. It's an unfortunate situation that we can't verify all of these things. But guess what? That is life. That's life within the field of UFOs. And the reason is because this is a problem pertaining to national security. In other words, this is not just a normal scientific topic on, as people like to say, a level playing field. There is no level playing field here. This is like a huge jigsaw puzzle. More than half the pieces have been taken out intentionally, fake pieces put in sometimes, and it's very difficult. Very difficult to wend your way through this.
Now, with that being said, obviously, we can't watch the entirety of the documentary because it's just short of 50 minutes long. But what I would like to do is skip ahead and address a couple of interesting points that Friedman himself makes a very strong case for.
Flying saucers. Then I inquired at Harvard, and Harvard Archives had a whole bunch of Menzel papers. Well, I'd like to come see them. Well, you'll need permission, written permission, from 3 different people to see the papers. Turns out Donald H. Menzel, UFO skeptic, had the longest continuous association with the National Security Agency and its Navy predecessor of anybody in the country. He said to Jack Kennedy, president, before he was president actually, "When we are properly cleared to each other, I can tell you more," he said. He had a top secret ultra clearance with the CIA. He was a cryptographer, taught cryptography, code breaking and making before the war. That he had continued after the war as head of the Naval Reserve Unit, Communications Unit Number 1 in Cambridge, which is where Harvard is. And he did classified work for about 30 different companies. I went away from there convinced that, hey, maybe this document might be true, because Menzel passed muster, much to my total surprise.
I think the Donald Menzel aspect of the whole Majestic 12 controversy is probably one of the most eye-opening, that you had this guy who was the arch debunker of his time, writing anti-UFO books with down-to-earth explanations, and then you find that he led this double life where he had high-level links with the intelligence community, did consulting and contract work for them, and had done so for decades. And regardless of whether or not he really was connected to some sort of Majestic 12 group, he was very well able to hide this double life that he had.
So you have, in the case of one of the Majestic 12 members in the form of Donald Menzel, you have someone whom is quite literally going out of their way to act as what we would think of as a debunker, someone who's going out of their way to spread really what should be called lies among the public at the time, especially throughout the 50s and 60s, telling everyone that, oh, well, all of these lights in the sky, they're the result of swamp gas. That's one of the more famous jokes at this point, that it's the result of swamp gas, or it's just mass hysteria, or it's people having hallucinations. And he went out of his way to spread disinformation. And of course, the Majestic 12 documents themselves even talk about using the media to condition people to look at UFOs and the discussion of UFOs as a quack subject and as something that only crazy people talk about. This is written in the document, where they're openly saying we have to use the media to lambaste people and to mock people and to make fun of people and to corral the opinions of the public in a way that makes this subject matter appear to be insane or outside of the mainstream level of acceptable discussion. And they did so quite well. And you have Project Blue Book in the 50s and 60s and 70s, where they go out of their way to attempt to answer all of these reports with so-called down-to-earth reasons, but these reasons themselves simply don't explain everything, and they never will, because in the case of this individual, Donald Menzel, we have someone who's debunking, but he himself in private is openly saying, at least according to the document, no, these are not swamp gas or mass hysteria. These are real. We are dealing with real aliens, gentlemen.
I discovered that Dr. Menzel had a close connection with Vannevar Bush dating back to 1934. Now, Bush had been at MIT. During World War II, he was sort of the science czar.
I certainly agree with you.
And I had discovered in Bush's papers...
Did you have any other clips that you wanted to go over, any other cases you wanted to get into?
Yeah, it's playing right now.
Oh, I'm so sorry. It's my problem. I apologize.
By the way, have my clips been caught by the recording equipment?
Sanjin, are you getting the video portions of the clips for the recording? Hopefully.
Okay, good.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to continue this one.
Congress Manuscript Division, a mysterious letter to me. It was from a law firm to Dr. Bush, thanking him for all his efforts with regard to the loyalty trial of Donald Menzel. And that fortunately, Menzel had been totally cleared. We really appreciate all the efforts you made. It was 1950. And it turned out Bush, who didn't have to testify in favor of anybody, he spoke extremely well of Menzel's efforts during the war. And it was clear he knew what they were. It was all together kind of a big thing to see Menzel connected with Bush, who had clearances for everything and, was right top dog in all the classified projects.
If it was shown upon Stan's investigations that Menzel was simply that a debunker, then that would have actually have suggested that his involvement in Majestic 12 was bogus, and by implication the documents were bogus. But because of the fact that Stan was able to show that Menzel did lead this double life and was heavily connected with US intelligence, that to me is a pointer that whoever put the Majestic 12 documents together was aware of the fact that Menzel would pass muster upon investigation.
Stan Friedman spent a lot of time looking into Menzel's career, and he discovered that Menzel had he actually had a quote secret life. He was, he was a Naval Reserve officer. He was a cryptographer, cryptanalyst, and so forth for the National Security Agency, and a variety of other things. This was not such a big secret as I think Stan seemed to think it was. I mean, if you knew anything about Menzel, you would have some general inkling that he was doing these kinds of things. He was involved in them, but even before MJ-12.
The question of whether anybody knew about Donald Menzel's high security background is an interesting one. You won't find it anywhere. There were people writing about Menzel and his lousy explanations for UFO sightings, but nobody pointing out his very tight connection with the intelligence community.
Now, I'd like to skip ahead in this one and address something a bit more specific. However, these particular reports that we have here oftentimes feature something that Stanton Friedman and others will use the Freedom of Information Act in order to... There we go. Here's a great example right here, where they will request documents under the Freedom of Information Act, and it will take a great deal of time for these documents to actually reach these men, and by the time they've been censored to the point of uselessness. Take a look.
Rejected the estimate of the situation, thereby setting a policy that ET was not acceptable explanation for UFO sightings.
everybody has to look at why they're doing this. You know, not necessarily the evidence, not necessarily the stories, but why are they doing this? You know, you've got 50 years of blacked out documents of stories being changed, like the Roswell incident 4 times. And you've got manuals that come out that are reporting these things. And they're just trying to lie to you and say since, you know, the late 60s they haven't reported these UFOs. Yet both military and commercial pilots are reporting these things. What are you left with to decide, you know, what this phenomenon is? Is it an unidentified space object like a comet or a meteorite or something, or a planet, you know, like they tried to explain some of the Blue Book files way? It doesn't seem plausible. The only thing that seems really plausible is this conspiracy is massive. You know, that the government is hiding this stuff for so long and they're trying so hard to keep it from us. I think the last question would be why? And that's what we all have to kind of answer for ourselves.
With that being said, obviously for those of you who saw, it shows not just that document page, but a great multitude that have been censored to the point of uselessness. And of course, the big question remains, well, if there's nothing to hide, then why is all of this censored? If UFOs don't exist, why is half the document, if not most of the document, just completely blacked out? And the obvious answer is, well, there's something there that's not, that the system does not want people to know. They don't want others to understand. And with this, you have a great multitude of different things. I mean, the subject of ufology is so deep. There's a great multitude of questions regarding something as simple as cattle mutilations or even crop circles. And regarding that latter discussion, I'd like to play this clip from what is called the Arecibo response. Now, it's important to recognize what the Arecibo response is. Back in the 1970s, Carl Sagan had gone to Puerto Rico, where he and a group of scientists had composed what is called the Arecibo message. In the Arecibo message, a coded binary system in the form of a data strip transferred into a code had been fired off into space by the Arecibo telescope. It is believed that the following clip I'm about to play was the response that appeared in northern England. This, if real, and I believe very sternly that it was real, should have made international headline news, but it didn't, and no one, or almost nobody, has ever heard of it. Take a look.
2001, suddenly the media paid some interest, because then something appeared that was almost impossible to overlook. Right behind me is Britain's largest radio telescope, the Chilbolton Observatory. And here it was that the greatest sensation in the crop circle history was to appear in the fields right in front of the telescope.
On the morning of 14th of August 2001, a formation was discovered which was different from any other previously seen. From the ground it looked like a tangled mess, wisps of crops spread around in no system. However, in the evening with growing shadows, a picture appeared, unmistakably that of a face. That picture represented a whole new technique, a screen technique, the same that's used for printing a picture on paper. 3 days later, the face was joined by something that looked like a data strip. Rows of counters made out of standing and flattened crop. But soon an astonishing similarity is discovered. In 1974, the astronomer Carl Sagan composed a message that NASA sent into space from the Arecibo telescope in Puerto Rico. Binary figures which constituted a graphic code presenting key factors about humans and the planet we live on. 27 years later, an identical pattern appears in a crop field right in front of a similar radio telescope. However, on closer inspection, it seemed to show that the code contained some fundamental differences. Sagan's message explained our calculation system, the dominant chemical substances within the elements that create life on Earth, about our DNA code, humans' height and quantity, and that we live on the third planet in our solar system, and lastly, a sketch of our radio telescope. The message received described the same calculation system, but that silicon is most dominant in life forms in contrast to carbon. The drawing also clearly shows a humanoid figure with large head in relation to its body. It's also explained that they have an extra string in their DNA, or
A triple helix DNA that's silicon-based. Think about that.
approximately 4 feet tall, inhabit the third, fourth and fifth planets in their solar system, and have a population of around 21.3 billion. Underneath, the telescope has been replaced by something more complex. 1 year earlier, a strange crop circle had appeared in the same place. Is this the same illustration as in the sender's code? Is this the correspondence radio telescope? If this is not an extremely clever and well-calculated joke conducted by humans, is it a serious response from an alien civilization?
The Chilbolton crop formations really gave new life to the speculations of who is behind this. Is it aliens? Where do they come from? And what is their purpose of this type of communication?
The following year, very nearly on the same day, a new picture appears that gives new force to the alien theory, this time in Crabwood, near the town of Winchester in Hampshire. Once again we see a face, but this time there is an unmistakable resemblance to something extraterrestrial. The picture also contains a print, somewhat similar to that of a CD, with something that appears to be a coded message. This formation also has a new type of design, this time with horizontal line patterns of variable thickness, similar to that of a TV picture. The message on the disc is similar to a spiral band built up of many boxes. But data expert Paul Weige manages to decipher the message.
And I had to enlarge the disc quite substantially on the computer and run some image analysis over it to make it clear so that I could see what was a standing tuft and what was flattened. And while I was doing this, I noticed that every so often there was almost a mistake in the diagram. It was like there was a tuft, where the little square tuft, it had done sort of half size. I thought that's a bit odd, and it seemed fairly regular. I was going round, and I sort of counted up, and it was sort of literally every sort of 8 bytes or whatever. And I thought, oh, 8 bytes, and you know, from computer side, is obviously some sort of binary code. So then I did the straightforward thing. I just converted it into ASCII, which is the standard sort of computer language that you encode the alphabet in. And of course I then started to get words forming out, and I thought, oh, I'm getting somewhere here. So I then did the whole thing for the whole lot, and got this message.
The message is in English and reads as follows. Beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises. Much pain, but still time. There is good out there. We oppose deception. Conduit closing. Many have been surprised by this message. Are there aliens with such faces that we should be aware of? Or is this a picture of the sender? Does this indicate the start of actual close contact with neighbors in the universe?
My own, and this is only a hypothesis, belief about this, is that there's an effort of the extraterrestrials are gradually trying to communicate with us, a very slow process, giving us a lot of time to digest the fact that we may not be alone here.
So obviously that's a very dramatic example of something that's presented a great deal of sophisticated messaging right to us. And of course there are many who would say, oh, well, it's a hoax, it's a hoax. There comes a point in time when something is far too elaborate to be done effectively by a hoaxer without the hoaxed nature of it being obvious. And in this case, I am hard-pressed to believe that such sophisticated messaging could be done so perfectly and so masterfully by hoaxsters, in addition to the fact that it's actually been noted that the actual crops themselves, when they have been altered by alien spacecraft, which, believe it or not, there are at least two, at least one that I know of, where a crop circle being created by a flying craft has been caught on camera, where one may see it and actively see all of the crops beneath the craft move and bend together. This is not a hoax. This is real. Now, if we move on to, say, Bob Lazar, as I had mentioned, we could discuss Bob Lazar in the future, and I'd like to take some time to address him. Bob Lazar, for the uninitiated, was a gentleman who went public in the 90s about his brief work with alien or extraterrestrial craft. And I'd like to play a clip, or at least a few clips, from his explanation video where he attempts to explain how the alien spacecraft flies. We're not going to watch the full presentation because obviously it's too long. However, I would like to make two statements and key points before we move on to the clip. The first is, I don't agree with Bob Lazar when it comes to the scientific principles of how the alien spacecraft fly. And what I mean by that is, Bob Lazar is what is called an atomist. I am against atomism. He believes in this idea of space and time being bent, stretched, and warped, and believes that every phenomena is the result of colliding BBs and particles. Both of those, for those who know me, or for those who don't know me, I am opposed to this view of the universe. It is irrational, it is illogical, and so, yes, I do believe sincerely that Bob Lazar worked on alien spacecraft, but that he was only able to interpret how the craft functioned through the lens of a scientific dogma, or rather a religion, I would argue, as to how the craft is working. With that being said, let's move on to the clip.
1988 and early 89, I worked on the propulsion systems of extraterrestrial vehicles for the United States government. The hardware and technology I was exposed to should be placed in the proper hands of the scientific community, and it is the right of every person on Earth to know that there is physical evidence which proves that there is life elsewhere and that at least one form of that life has been here. For those of you whose information about me is limited to this video, I'll give you a brief background. I'm a physicist. I have degrees in physics and electronics technology. I worked in a number of scientific programs, some of which require top secret and above top secret security clearances, of which the most easily verifiable is my early 1980s job here at the Los Alamos Mason Physics Facility in Los Alamos, New Mexico.
It should be worth noting that there is paperwork evidence proving that Lazar did in fact work there, and that Stanton Friedman did not investigate enough. He merely made one phone call, and when someone said, "No, I've never heard of him," he ended his investigation there, rather than looking at the paperwork, which, beyond a shadow of a doubt, proves he in fact did work there because his name is present on an employee roster.
Between December of '88 and April of '89, I worked as a senior staff physicist in what has to be the most secret project in history. My place of work was a facility at an area known as S4 on the Nellis Air Force Range in central Nevada. Area S4 is located approximately 15 miles south of the infamous Area 51 installation at Groom Lake, where the U-2 and SR-71 spy planes were developed. For the duration of my employment at S4, I was paid by the United States Navy.
Also, his paperwork regarding his actual paycheck has also been verified by the IRS as legitimate pay stubs issued by the United States government. The only difference is they were unable to track exactly where the source of that money came from, but they could in fact confirm that it was paid by the government. The reason for this is because Lazar himself was paid with what is called black project money, meaning It is money given by the government to branches of the military without strings attached, and they are simply told, take the money, make some magic happen.
For the purpose of this video, I'm going to segregate the information contained here into two separate parts. The first part will deal with information with which I've had hands-on experience and personal instruction. In other words, not only did I read briefings and not only was I taught the theories of these technologies, but they were demonstrated for me and I know they are true and accurate. Some of the points covered in this first section will be how vast distances of space are traveled by virtue of an intense gravitational field, how this gravitational field is generated, what the power source is and how it functions, and general information about disks and the project at S4. The second part of this will deal with subjects on which I've read supporting information, yet for the most part I had no other way to corroborate the information or ascertain its accuracy. When we get to part 2, it'll be obvious why proof of some of this information could not be conclusive. Some of the points covered in this second section will be information about the beings that brought us this technology, and how these beings have historically interacted with man. I've been prudent in selecting what to expose here, and I think that some of this information should not be made available to the general public. This information is being conveyed to you as it was to me, with the exception that in most cases I've simplified things for those of you with non-scientific and non-technological backgrounds. So let's begin. C star speed of light. Accessing gravity A with
We're going to skip ahead through most of the science section because I don't agree with much of what he's saying.
Iraq. And for demonstrating energy, what element 116 releases as it decays? Or
Element 116 is the alleged material that is supposedly the fuel for these spacecraft. Now, the way he explains it is these spacecraft from Zeta Reticuli are burning the material one atom at a time, where a single atom enters the chamber in what we would think of as an extremely small, ordinary engine-sized so-called hadron collider, which is a misnomer, but it is being what is called transmutated, which is a real word. That's not just a word created for the sake of alchemy. And once this change occurs, it immediately becomes a completely different element that then becomes reactive, comes in contact with a gaseous material, and the two explode, wherein which the ship then absorbs 100% of the power released by that explosion caused by that single atom detonating. This could be arguably said to be the most efficient form of combustion engine possible, burning one atom at a time. But in the world of metaphysics, it is still considered a mark of evil.
what it radiates is antimatter.
Antimatter is nothing more than matter that spins at a opposite or a different, not convert to energy, it releases its energy. Unfortunately, because Bob Lazar is an atomist, he, like all other atomists, believe that fire and explosion is the expression of energy. That is not true.
And remember, the rapid conversion of matter to energy is what we generally call an explosion.
That is not true.
To demonstrate the explosive power of antimatter, let's pick a random area where an atomic bomb might explode. Oh, let's say Iraq. And for demonstration purposes, let's say an atomic bomb would explode, for instance, in, Baghdad. Well, if one of our older atomic bombs exploded in Baghdad, the area of total devastation, which is indicated by the red dot on the map, would be approximately 2 miles. This would be caused by a fission reaction in which less than 1% of the nuclear material is converted to energy. Most of you are familiar with the bombs that were dropped on Japan in World War II. This is the same bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki August 9, 1945. About this same time, Dr. Edward Teller, who's known as the father of the hydrogen bomb, figured out that a nuclear fusion bomb was possible. Fusion would release even more energy and cause an even bigger explosion from the same amount of nuclear material. Much to Dr. Teller's dismay, the Japanese surrendered, we never dropped the hydrogen bomb, and Dr. Teller has been in a bad mood ever since. But if a hydrogen bomb containing the same amount of nuclear material as the Nagasaki bomb were to explode in Baghdad, the area of total devastation would be approximately 20 miles. This would be caused by a nuclear fusion reaction, which again, less than 1% of the nuclear material actually converts to energy or explodes. The other 99% of the nuclear material on this type of bomb is dispersed, but is not involved in the actual nuclear fusion reaction. Now, if a bomb was made with the same amount of nuclear material as the Nagasaki bomb, and that material was antimatter, when that bomb exploded in Baghdad, the area of total devastation would include parts of Africa, Europe, and Asia, with the exact area of total devastation being very difficult to calculate.
So in this demonstration, what he's trying to present is the fact that the annihilation reaction of the two colliding and detonating, so to say, or releasing all of its energy, is 100% efficient. And because it is 100% efficient and there is no energy lost, that is why such a small amount of so-called antimatter, which should in truth be called low band or inverse band matter, once it comes in contact with ordinary matter, the result is a complete explosion. It's an incredible explosion, and that is why such a small amount of it is so destructive.
This would be caused by a total annihilation reaction, which is the complete conversion of matter to energy.
That's not true.
100% of the nuclear material on this bomb would explode or convert to energy. We currently have no practical way to harness antimatter into a bomb, and generally speaking, we can only isolate antimatter in a particle accelerator and store it for a short time.
Let's move on to, he's about to move on to the more important part.
Generally speaking, all of these actions and reactions inside of the reactor are orchestrated perfectly like a tiny little ballet.
Let's move ahead to the actual construction of the ship itself.
So we've learned how space-time is distorted by a gravitational field.
Which is not true.
We've learned how that gravitational field is generated, and we've also learned where you get the power to accomplish all of this. Now it's time to link all we've learned in our science lessons to the vehicle that utilizes all of this technology. And a few years ago, I never thought I'd hear myself say this, but that vehicle is a disk, which is generally referred to as a flying saucer. I had at least partial views of the 9 different disks out at Area S4, but the one I'm going to describe to you now is the one in which I not only saw 2 of the 3 in it. This particular disc appeared to be in excellent condition, and because of its sleek appearance, I nicknamed it the Sport Model. The Sport Model is about 16 feet tall and 40 feet in diameter. The exterior skin of the disc is metal, which is the color of unpolished stainless steel. The Sport Model sits on its belly when it's not energized. As you can see, the hatch is located on the upper half of the disc, with just the bottom portion of the door wrapping around the center lip of the disc. The interior level of the disc is divided into 3 levels. The lower level is where the 3 gravity amplifiers and amplifier guides are located. These are the things used to amplify and focus the gravity A wave that we learned about in our science lessons. The reactor is located directly above the 3 gravity amplifiers on the center level and is in fact centered between them. The reactor is similar to this half-scale model. The element 115 is machined into triangles like this and is then inserted into the reactor. This piece of element 115 is the source of the gravity A wave as well as the target that is bombarded with protons to release the antimatter, both of which we learned about in our science lessons. The center level of this disc also houses the control consoles and seats, both of which were too small and too low to the floor to be functional for adult human beings. The walls of the center level are all divided into archways. At one point in time, when the disc was energized, one of the archways became transparent and you could see the area outside of it just as if the archway was a window. After the panel had been transparent for a while, a form of writing, which was unlike any alphabetic, scientific, or mathematical symbols I've ever seen, began to appear on the transparent archway. And I was never informed as to how all of this was achieved, not that any of that would have required alien technology.
For the record, transparent metal has actually been more than Star Trek and has actually not only been seen in Star Trek, but it has actually been accomplished recently. For those of you who are curious about such a thing, you can look up what is called transparent aluminum.
I was never given access to the upper level of the disk, so I can't enlighten you as to what the porthole-like areas are, other than I can assure you that they're not portholes. Now, before I go any further about the disk, I'm going to show you where and under what circumstances I saw it tested. My job in this program was to be part of a back engineering team. Back engineering is the act of taking a finished product and tearing it apart to find out what makes it tick. The goal in this program was to see if the technology of the disk could be duplicated with Earth materials. When I went to work, I was flown from McCarran Airport in Las Vegas to Area 51, which is a highly secure government base on the Nevada test site. Area 51 is located about 125 miles north of Las Vegas, near the Groom Mountains and the Groom Dry Lake bed. From Area 51, I was bused to an even more highly secure facility located about 15 miles south of Area 51 called S4. S4 is situated at the base of the Papoose Mountains by the Papoose Dry Lake bed. The airspace around S4 is restricted, and if any unwelcome aircraft strays into the outer sector, they radio the pilot and instruct him or her to leave. If that pilot continues and strays into the middle sector, jets will be scrambled to escort the intruding aircraft out. If for any reason whatsoever that aircraft penetrates into the inside sector before jets can be airborne, ground-to-air missiles will neutralize the intruder. The moral of this story is don't try and fly into S4. The S4 installation is built into the mountain, and the 9 hangar doors are angled at about 60 degrees. These doors are covered with a sand-textured coating to blend in with the side of the mountain and the desert floor. As you can see in this representation, my ID badge had a white background with 1 light blue and 1 dark blue diagonal stripe in the upper left-hand corner. At the bottom of the badge, there were letters and numbers designating various areas, including S4.
It is worth noting that the side of his badge still said MAJ for majestic. In addition, the S4 hangars that he is speaking of, as well as other bases that have only recently been declared public, were, at least for a time, known only to Soviet spy satellites.
On my badge, there was a star punch through S4. The back of the ID badge was dark blue with a vertical mag stripe running down one side. The hangar that housed the sport model was like a typical airplane hangar with the exception of the angled doors that I mentioned before. The hangar was equipped with typical tools and extensive electronic equipment. It also had a machine with an X-ray emblem on it and an overhead crane rated at 20,000 pounds. Equipment in this hangar was marked with a black number 41 with a white circle around it. It was outside of this hangar that I saw the sport model tested. Now, when the disk travels near another source of gravity, such as a planet or moon, it doesn't use the same mode of travel that we learned about in our science lessons. When a disk is near another source of gravity, like Earth, the gravity A wave, which...
We're going to skip all that for the moment because I don't agree with some of what he is saying, but that is okay. We are going to move on to the second section.
From the government Bible. The end of this first part, in which I'm presenting to you as fact. At this point, we begin our second part, which is the section that contains what I call excerpts from the government Bible. I call it that because, as you can tell from part 1, there's a small segment of the United States government that makes scientific and technological judgments from a knowledge base that is not available to the general public. If the following information is true, the United States government also makes judgments on a historical, philosophical, and even theological level from a knowledge base that is not available to the general public. These are excerpts from some of that information. As part of my indoctrination into the program at S4, I would randomly be taken into a small room which contained a table, a chair, and 120 or so briefings in blue folders. I'd be left there to read for varying amounts of time, usually about half an hour. These briefings contained a wide spectrum of information, mostly relating to aliens and alien technology. These reports appeared to be an overview of alien information which could be used to brief scientists from any field about the scope of the whole project. and not just their specific field of endeavor. The overview of Project Galileo was accurate. I read the overview and later witnessed evidence which proved it to be accurate. So it is possible that scientists involved with other projects could have seen evidence that these other overviews were also accurate, but I can't make that assertion. To me, these reports were simply words on paper. So to keep from saying allegedly and supposedly in every sentence, I'll relay this information to you as I read it, since I've already put this disclaimer on it. This technology that you've learned about thus far was brought here by some alien beings from the Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 star system. These stars are located in the constellation of Reticulum, which can only be seen from the southern hemisphere. Zeta Reticuli is a binary star system, which means it has 2 stars, and is located approximately 30 light years from Earth. These beings are from Reticulum 4, which is the 4th planet out from Zeta Reticuli 2. This is the way star systems were referred to in these reports. They simply designate the name of the star and the number of planets from the nearest to the furthest from the star. For instance, our Sun was designated as Sol, and the Earth was referred to as Sol 3 because we're the 3rd planet out from the Sun. A day on Reticulum 4 is 90 Earth hours long. The beings are 3 to 4 feet tall and weigh 25 to 50 pounds. They have grayish skin and large heads with almond-shaped wraparound eyes. They have very slight nose, mouth, and ear positions and are hairless. Any dates in the information regarding these beings were written in a 6-digit number which began with 1623. Since I had no idea what the 6-digit number was for the present year, I had no way of calculating when these beings arrived, or at least arrived this time. These beings said that they had been visiting Earth for a long time and presented photographic evidence which they contended was over 10,000 years old. There was an exchange of hardware and information in Central Nevada until 1979, at which time there was a conflict which brought the program to an abrupt halt. The beings left, but were to return at a 1623 date, and I don't know what that date is. With the remaining hardware and information, the U.S. government started the back engineering program. In May of 1987, some scientists took an antimatter reactor to an underground blast facility on the Nevada test site to perform an experiment. Unfortunately for them, their experiment required them to cut the reactor open, which resulted in their deaths. This explosion was explained to others at the test site as a previously unannounced low-yield underground nuke test. I was hired in December of 1988 to replace one of these men. These beings conveyed information about the capability of affecting the human brain to anesthetize the human body. This is done without any physical contact from a remote source. For this anesthesia to be accomplished, the brain has to be in a relaxed state similar to that required for hypnosis. If the brain is subject to any external stimulation like stimulant drugs or loud music, this manipulation of the nervous system is ineffective. These beings said that man was the product of externally corrected evolution. They said that man, as a species, had been genetically altered 65 times. They refer to humans as containers, yet I don't know what we're containers of. As I'm sure you now know, it was impossible for me to corroborate the information in the second section.
With that being said, I do wish to take a moment to say it's my own personal and strictly my own personal belief that the reason why blue skin is recognized as a symbol of holiness in both Native American and especially in India as something that's part of their culture, to be recognized as the holiest of holies, to have blue skin, I have maintained is likely, or more than likely, the result of the mistaken suits that are worn traditionally by Pleiadians. In every encounter, human beings routinely talk about Pleiadians wearing their blue suits. But because, I argue, we never had skin-tight outfits eons ago, these beings did not understand that it was clothing, and so made the mistake of believing that the blue suits the Pleiadians wore was their skin. And it was because of their angelic nature and the amount of love that they radiated that led to the sense of reverence and holiness that the cultures across the world have and maintain to this day. However, with that being said, I would like to change from this particular clip of Lazar to a different one.
Essentially work, back engineer, or analyze one of the craft. It's very plain. It's all one solid color, a grayish pewter color, the same color as the outside of the craft. There are no sharp corners anywhere. Every device in the craft, the seat, the amplifier housings, everything has a rounded corner on it, almost as if it was all fashioned out of wax and then slightly melted, so everything curved, even where the ceiling meets the floor on the end. Everything has a curve to it. Very, very plain, very wide open, very impractical use of space. And there are 3 levels. The lower level houses the amplifiers themselves that swing, the 3 of them. The center level is where you enter the craft, where the seats and the amplifiers are, and the top level is a small area, and I did not have access to that, so I don't know what's up there. Absolutely alien craft, there's no question about it. Well, first of all, the scope of the project was to back engineer it. If they were United States craft, we wouldn't be going backward trying to find out how they were built if we had built them. Second of all, the size of the equipment inside, the size of the seats, the materials that were in use, completely alien to us, pardon the pun, and the fuel, element 115, essentially non-existent. All these factors together, and of course the briefing information stating that they were alien craft.
Along with Robert Lazar, rocket scientist David Adair is one of the few individuals who will go on record concerning his personal experiences with alien technology at Area 51.
Now, I'd like to take a moment to explain the clip that we're about to see. This is what is called the alien interview footage. It is alleged information or an alleged video that was smuggled out from one of these facilities at sometime in the late 80s, early 90s. The idea is that the individual known as Victor, that is a member of Heaven's Gate. Right
Pass from container to container.
There we go. The idea here is that the clip itself is an alleged gray or alien being of some kind that is being held by the United States government. I would like to explore this clip, and we're going to play it.
Aliens not compromised.
Program.
That's correct.
You removed the soundtrack from the tape before you turned it over to this program.
That's correct. I can't allow the voices of the project personnel to be heard by the general public. There's a very good chance their family or friends on the outside might recognize them.
Isn't your purpose in releasing this tape to expose Area 51 to the world?
My purpose is to expose the existence of the aliens, not compromise these individuals. I made the decision to come forward. I'm taking precautions to protect my own identity, and I don't think it's fair for me to put these others in danger of exposure. In any case, the interview on the tape went nowhere. It was interrupted, as you'll see.
Can you describe for us what we're seeing?
All right, we're looking at the interview suite at S4. It's kept dark for the comfort of the aliens. The figure who is just barely visible in the left foreground is the telepath, and behind the camera is a raked seating area for observers. Although in this case, I believe the only other person present was a military aide. The alien is seated behind a glass partition in a biocontainment area, which is maintained at Biosafety Level 2, the lowest designation. That's primarily for the protection of the aliens, not us. The theory is that if they were going to infect us with an alien bug, it would have happened 50 years ago. In fact, all the indications are the aliens eliminated microbial and viral life from their own ecosystem long ago. They aren't susceptible to our diseases directly, but it has been shown that microbes can reproduce and form colonies within their respiratory systems, which tends to exacerbate the debilities they seem to suffer anyway in our environment. In fact, you can see here the alien is beginning to flag. The interview was not going well. The telepath was trying to clarify some points from a previous interview, but he wasn't receiving coherent responses. As you can see, the being is in real distress. At this point, the telepath is sending out a message to the medical staff. He's trying to communicate with the alien, but he's getting no response. There's very little he can do. There's no direct connection between his space and the biocontainment area. That's the aide stepping in on the... I have to say, the medical personnel at S4 are less than first rate. They tend to be selected for their willingness to keep secrets rather than their medical competence. By the way, he's not shining that light in the nasal cavity. I'm sorry. It's very hard for me to watch this.
You're asking me if I think this is real? That have I I don't know. That this is not a tricked up version like the alien autopsy. It doesn't attempt to distract you away from the alien. It doesn't have that cinema verite black to great lengths to try to fool the audience.
I'd like to skip ahead to the interview. Robert Dean.
In Baker's opinion, there was no controversy at all.
It's a
UFO expert Robert Dean, on the other hand, had no doubt whatsoever.
It's not a staged event. This is real.
In the 1960s, Robert O. Dean served as an Army where he claims to have seen first-hand evidence of alien beings and their artifacts. Retired from Dean was asked to view the tape and offer his expert opinion.
They're treating him like a piece of livestock.
Moved by what he saw.
That breaks my heart. You've got your hands on some pretty sensitive material. I don't know how the hell you got this. I don't know who you got it from. But you got yourself a tiger by the tail with this footage.
With that, draw all of this to a close, or have a more discussionary view of the matter, is this particular interview by Richard Dolan, who was interviewing one of the gentlemen whom had actually recent days is that, oh, well, there was never a UFO at all. It was just Project Mogul. Project Mogul was, and we'll move on to the clip in a moment, But I want to take a moment to debunk something. Project Mogul cannot be a viable answer. Now, some people ask, well, what is Project Mogul? Project Mogul was an experiment by the United States military during the Cold War in order to send up these balloons into the air. And the Soviet Union have acquired their nuclear weapons, and they are testing them in many, many rapid tests all over the world. These balloons in Project Mogul were designed to detect those pieces of evidence brought about by the detonations of Soviet bombs in the atmosphere, as well as provide weather information. However, several reasons make this an impossible answer for the Roswell incident. First of all, military secret black project that was being held away from public eye. It was a well-known and well-understood concept. Secondly, they talk about the bodies and attempt to dismiss the bodies that were seen by the witnesses as nothing more than test dummies. Well, that argument can't hold either, because test dummies were not in use for many, many, many years later. So the Project Mogul argument, for a multitude of reasons, and the pieces of the balloons, well, it was never part of the project's policy to ever retrieve these balloons. The idea was, once those balloons were sent up, they would never be brought back. They would relay their information, and if they crashed, it didn't matter where they were. Recovery was simply not a part of the policy. So for the government and others to make such an incredible story or sensation about trying to recover the balloons, or try to act like it was a big secret, simply don't hold. Gentlemen who claim to have not only been there at the crash itself, or at least slightly after, but to have actually seen the survivors with his own eyes.
I would like to say something. You got the news media as well. They're trying to promote these saucers, and what I think might be happening is you don't want to let people know right away. You want to take time. You want to take your time and slowly let them know.
You can't live forever, you know. So if procedure am I going to have,
Such a great
got
podcast, man.
probably
Hmm?
a few more months to make it. So that's kind of why I'm kind of going along with the interview at this time.
For people not to know about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you just through what exactly your experiences were?
Was drafted into the military. After that, I was sent to the Signal Training Center, in eastern United States. I went through the signal training course, and at that time, I went through the cryptography course, crypto. They had 5 instructors that were getting out of military. 5 students, and I was 3rd in the class, so I got pulled as an instructor.
Not yet?
No. After one day, my boss came to me, and he, make some extra money. And I said, oh, money is good. So to put it through, I would have to get a top secret White House Q clearance. Boy, must be a pretty exclusive thing, And I said, well, what is this? The CIA for Eastern United States, And I said, oh, I didn't know that. About 6 weeks, my security clearance came through, and I got my, like a credit card, where I could just go up to the door and slice it, walk right. I used a artificial name too. Never used my real name. The project he was on, and that was Project Blue Book.
You're saying some of the Blue Book cases were,
Yes.
were completely fictitious?
Yes. I think it was Fort Belvoir, Maryland.
Fort Belvoir?
Yeah. Or it didn't come from CIA headquarters. But we would get reports. They had it Mexico or Italy or something like that. And then we through on it. They would go out and interview the people to see if they were nutcases.
Frequently?
Yeah, I wasn't, but I always stayed wise. But from the CIA would do that. We would get like a new report, probably coming into the Army, fresh off the farm, So I really didn't have much knowledge of and on Project Blue Book and what they had found so far, as far as and the Roswell incident.
How did you feel when this first got dumped on you?
With all of this, And I said to him, I don't know if I'm going to be able to be a judge when I don't have much knowledge of it, So...
What did he say?
He said, well, as we go, and you'll see how this thing is working out.
And then the other thing is, of course, you...
No, I couldn't tell anybody. In fact, I had to take a vow that I wouldn't tell others, and more of it for 50 years, which is up in 2000.
looking at images, photographs, video. It's 1958, maybe the fall of 58.
Book thing kind of went pot, you know. If you remember, back in those days, they kind of declared it as a...
Telling the world all UFOs are misidentifications, hoaxes,
balloons,
psychological issues, whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
Both got a new assignment. And he says, oh, I said, where are we going? Oh, he says, we're going to the Capitol. Push is trying to find out something about, all about these aliens. But never sent back reports to him.
The MJ-12. At that time, yes.
They called us in, went into the Oval Office, and they said, we called the people in from but they told us that the government had no jurisdiction over past general. You didn't tell him to go to hell without any. I want you and your boss to fly out there. He says, I want you to tell them, whoever is in charge, tell them that coming week to get into Washington and to report to me. And if they don't, in Colorado, and we're going to go over, we're going to take the base over. I don't care what kind of, rip this thing apart.
Eisenhower was going to invade
Yes,
Area 51. You go out with your superior.
Yes.
You fly out. You land. What happens? Can you describe this whole process? What you saw?
South to S4 and like different garage door open. They had like different saucer crafts. The very first one, Roswell craft, and it was kind of crashed up, but then it died except for a couple.
So you see the Roswell craft, and what are some of the others that you see?
Because it looked like real heavy aluminum foil. Next to it, and you could rock it. The whole thing probably weighed 150, 300. Yeah, it was like a reverse gravitational thing of some kind. Later on, I got the mathematical code 3x5 card. I guess there are different types of grays. And so at the later on at S4 autopsy film, and then the colonel said, what we've got in here, alien.
All right, right there. How did you feel at that moment?
Well, I to see the real thing. All we saw was film.
You had to have a little bit of heart racing.
Go in and had like a partial interview with him.
So what did this gray alien look like? Could you?
A bit oriental.
So I'm just.
Now let's take a moment to pause that right there. He just said that the several different documents that state that one of the groups of beings who have allegedly made contact with our government are a race of little beings whom appear to have Asian faces or Oriental. There's only about 3 to 4 minutes. We'll finish it. But that particular statement made by him is very telling to me.
Wondering if it looked almost human, what about the
Look human as far as the skin tone and basically the
how was its head size compared with a normal human, for example?
brain was kind of a little bit bigger. And some of the nose was very, very small. And the ears were just like holes. Mouth was very small.
Now, why were they bringing you out here at all, anyway, to see an alien? What was the point?
To go back and tell the president they actually had one.
So he did not know at this point if there was an alien at S4?
No.
What did you do then at Area? Were you done, or did you have other things to do with
Yeah,
S4?
so basically we were kind of done, went back to Area 51. They took us into the main building, and there we saw a U-2, which of course we didn't know existed. And a model of the SR-71.
Yeah, the Blackbird.
So, but like I mentioned earlier, it was not a model of the current Blackbird,
It's an earlier version.
but an early version.
Did you go directly to Washington after this? Or did
Yes.
you go somewhere else? How did they get, did you fly
We
regular airline or?
We flew back to the commuter plane back to the air base, and then took President Eisenhower's Lockheed Electra back to Washington.
You and your supervisor,
Yeah.
superior officer, and now you're meeting with the president?
Yes.
Can you describe this?
Well, we met with him in, the second story of the old OSS warehouse building.
OSS stands for Office of Strategic Service.
And Eisenhower and Nixon were there, and also Hoover was there. So he asked us what was going on, and we told him about the alien, the whole situation, and the black projects and so on. And he was just totally shocked. He appeared for the first time to be worried. You know, like he was worried.
I would think that Eisenhower would, I mean, he certainly knew that flying saucers were real.
Yes.
He knew that there were aliens. So I guess I'm just wondering, what would he have been, really surprised about?
Surprised about the black programs. Eisenhower said, got to keep this thing completely secret. You know, can't talk about this.
Your actual name is, the name you grew up with, that was a different name than what you had in the...
I never used it in the CIA at all.
Now, what about today? You're going on the public record, and this is still sensitive information, even though earlier you talked about, security oaths that maybe expire after a certain period of time.
50 years.
But you're still concerned.
Linda Moldenhauer's phone call, her phone was tapped, and they got my phone number, and through the telephone company, they were able to find me, and so on.
When they found you, what happened?
I was going to a grocery store. Two guys in black suits come out of a black Lincoln town car and came over to see me. And they told me that I'd better not publish anything or talk to Linda about any more things. So at that time, I did, I stopped.
That was enough to intimidate you.
Yes. Rather remain anonymous. Never show my face on anything.
Really, thank you for doing this.
Yes. This was, I guess, kind of a good idea because I feel much better having talked about it. I kind of feel like there's a load off my shoulders.
Really?
Because I had an awful lot of secrets that I had kept over the years.
With that being said, we can see right there that there's a great deal of secrecy, but that's not really saying all that much. What we do know is this. When it comes to all of this information in ufology, because I'd like to wrap this information up, being that it's now 2 a.m, the message here in the end is that we're truly not alone, and ufology is so deeply, deeply involved. There are those such as Dr. Stephen Greer, who would unfortunately have us all believing his message that, as he believes, all alien civilizations in the universe are benevolent and kind, and that all the incidents of negative encounters are simply staged by the CIA. I don't agree with that. I do agree with Dr. Greer insofar as his statements that alien technology has the means to not only change the world, but to solve all humanity's material problems, and spiritual problems even still, perhaps, if we are to learn spiritual truths from them. But I am not on board with the idea that all alien civilizations are benevolent. With that being said, from Project Blue Book to Bob Lazar, and from all of these different people, abductees, contactees, and all of the leaked documents and interviewees, ufology is, to me, a deeply, deeply intriguing subject matter that I would hope others, even if they're not necessarily interested immediately, would take seriously, because it's something that is so monumental. It stands to change not only our past and our understanding of our past, but our present and indeed our future, to tell us all who we really are and that we're not alone in this universe.
Thank you so much for Mr. Giovanni Dark. I really, truly appreciate it. It was fantastic the first time, and I'm again sorry that recording was lost, but in the end it's a blessing in disguise because this episode was even better and you were able to add the visuals, which I really appreciate. That makes this your second full-length documentary produced on the Temple Mount. If anyone hasn't seen it, please check out the first one, Secret Technology and Free Energy. Suppressed Technology and Free Energy with Mr. Giovanni. Excellent documentary you can find on the Temple Mount YouTube channel. Please subscribe to that channel, join the Temple Mount Discord server, and keep an eye on the announcements channel. We got lots of great events upcoming, as well as over 10 events that have already been finished that are premiering every day on the Temple Mount YouTube channel. So make sure you subscribe, don't miss any of that. Giovanni, thank you. I'd like to ask you to come up with a name for your own personal show. So, for example, Zoo has Ancient Mysteries with Zoo. Since you're a recurring guest, it'd be cool if it was like whatever you want with Giovanni, and then we can make it like a little franchise where you can have your own sort of show.
Perfect.
Yeah, if you think that'd be a good idea, you can think about it or let me know anytime.
Thank you for having me. Once again, I'm looking forward to coming back because this subject is very fascinating to me, and I'm glad that others too find interest in it.
Absolutely, and I hope that this one goes far and wide and takes another notch away from anti-disclosure and the denialists and moves us towards rationing and reckoning with what is really going on. And I think you've done a great service to the world with this episode. So we thank you for it. Thank you also to the audience for listening, and thank you so much to Mr. Sanjin for recording and editing. Truly appreciate all of you guys. God bless, and remember, do not take the mark of the beast. That being said, let's jump now to the Templar Tavern for the remainder of the night. We can hang out and talk about anything we want in there.